Hello and welcome to the Cortright Cast, episode 10. This is your place to find semi-intelligent discussions surrounding everything from science fiction, fantasy, books, movies, Hollywood, and everything in between. I'm your host, Alex Cortright, and I'm joined by my brother, Jonathan Cortright, and today we're talking about Spider-Man. As in the live-action portrayals of Spider-Man throughout the years, starting with Toby Macguire's Spider-Man and ending with what Tom Holland has been putting out with Marvel in the past few years. So the way that we're going to do this is go through all three Spider-Man attempts over the years, from Toby Macguire, Andrew Garfield, and to Tom Holland, and what's next for the series. And we're kind of going to talk about what they did well and what they did worse and where they could have improved and where we would like to see the franchise going in the future. And then we're going to rank the films by everything from the best movie on its own to the best actor to the best collective series and what they really got wrong and right in just involving, the truth of their portrayal as well as just what made for a good film. So Toby Macguire jumps onto the scene as Spider-Man in, what was it? That had to have been
2002.
2002. I'm going to trust you on that. You're my date person. I can't name a single date that any of these movies came out. I might know like a 5-year range. But so Tobey Maguire's first Spider-Man movie was, the reason we're starting here as opposed to anywhere else and starting with just live action is because this was really right at the beginning of superhero films being live action and being remotely acceptable.
Yeah.
But it was a really an experience for me going to the theater as a kid. It was, one of my first time. I think around that time we had like X-Men had come out. Mm-hmm. Was that one already out? Yeah. And there were starting to be like this hope among like comic book fans and superhero fans of like, whoa, maybe we can actually get some adaptations that can really get some steam. And I think that Spider-Man 1 is still one of the better superhero films, at least in terms of standalone solo superhero films, of the years. I mean, that film did so much right.
Well, it also, in retrospect, holds up a lot better than X-Men. Like the X-Men movies, to me, are ones that were
Even
very successful at the time and very well liked at the time. But looking back on them, they really don't hold up to me.
Even the good ones like X2.
X1 and X2, to me, don't hold up at all anymore.
Yeah, and I enjoyed them, and I still think that X2 is a good movie. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
But Spider-Man 1, actually, there's areas where it doesn't hold up as well, but it holds up pretty well.
Well, the thing is, it's an endearing movie. And they didn't really reach too deep in like the effects and the scope of what they were going for to the point where it would struggle to hold up. I mean, and this is why I really have a soft spot for Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man in general, is because the stories in that series, barring the third one, were incredibly well done, and they were small. They were dedicated specifically to Spider-Man and his character, like as a person. And I think that's something that a lot of current superhero movies have lost.
Yeah. The movie moves really well. Like, it's a really fun and entertaining movie, and it never drags. And it's thoroughly entertaining. I don't think it balanced the really campy tone that Sam Raimi was going for as well as 2 did. Mm-hmm. So parts of it feel overly campy. Green Goblin looks way too much like a Power Ranger. Some of the lines are horrifically bad. Like, there's areas of it that I feel like it was this tonal balance that Sam Raimi was going for that he really like nailed in Spider-Man 2. But in Spider-Man 1, it stumbles a little bit.
Yeah, I could see it stumbling a little bit in Spider-Man 1, but even still, and this could be because of the time, it was kind of new territory back then. On one hand, I like to be like, I wish that a lot of the newer superhero movies were more like those movies. But then on the other hand, it's like they were the first to do it, really. Mm-hmm. The first ones to really attack that. And part of what I really loved about that movie, specifically 1, but this involves 2 as well, is that they really captured the Spider-Man archetype in its purest form, because the Spider-Man perception has changed over the years from Andrew Garfield to Tom Holland. And I understand that it probably needs to, but the classic nerdy teenage Spider-Man and his teenage problems, and like I thought, and just the whole Toby Macguire really captured the kind of nerdy vibe of Spider-Man in a way that I feel like the other two, and I get that it's supposed to change, but like without moving forward too much, like Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland are way too attractive and cool to play Spider-Man to me, and I understand why they did it. And I like aspects of both of those portrayals, but going back to the beginning, Toby Macguire is always going to be like the original Spider-Man for me.
Yeah. And he was also very much a adaptation of the 50s era Spider-Man,
which is the most popular.
Right. Whereas actually Garfield and Holland look far more like the modern looking Spider-Man.
And I don't fault the fact that they've moved on in that way. It's just in my heart, it's like, oh, that's like what I've always wanted Spider-Man to be. But and now moving into 2, there's plenty you can say about 1, plenty you can say about 2, and I don't even know how much you want to touch on 3. But Spider-Man 2 has got to be obviously the best of the 3. And it might be, in my opinion, the best Spider-Man movie that's ever been made so far in regards to live action. But it took everything that the first did well. Like, I really like the first. I think it's a good movie. But it took everything that the first one did well and just elevated that and really nailed home just such a great condensed and like small story. Like, it was a story about Spider-Man. It was about a few people and a few instances, and they did it so well. So many superhero movies now have to go big. They have to end the world. They have to have, if it's in Marvel, it's got to have 7,000 more superheroes like poking their head in like, hey, I'm a cameo. But like, this was back before you had all that. And it was just such a pure, well-told story. Yeah.
And also the action scenes in 2 are still incredible.
They still hold.
Some of the CG is a little bit like, dodgy, but it's totally accepable for the
it's
time.
Not to the point
still,
of like
it still looks really good.
Yeah. But they're just creative. They look great. They feel great.
I still don't think anything in the Marvel movies, like the MCU movies, comes close to the train scene in Spider-Man 2. Like, I don't think most action scenes in superhero movies come close to the train
Definitely
scene.
not a Tom Holland Spider-Man. I mean, maybe you could find some other action sequences within the MCU, obviously, like that with other characters, but specifically regarding Spider-Man, I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
And well, not just the train. I mean, the tower, like skyscraper scene when they're like falling down the skyscraper with him and Doc Ock and like fighting in and out of the sky. Like, just, this was like Spider-Man 2 was really the pinnacle of superhero movies at the time. Yeah. Like, it was like, whoa.
I still think in a lot of ways it's the pinnacle of a very comic book feeling superhero movie.
And
it really, to me, nailed the tone that Raimi was going for, with it being really campy and really comic booky, but also like still the stakes mattered, and it really did just double down on everything good about the first one and minimized most of the things that were lesser about the first one.
And when you talk about comic book feel, it wasn't the comic book feel in that it was like we have to throw in every 5 seconds like an Easter egg to the actual comic book. It literally just felt like very comic book vibe, which is something that I appreciate because I'm always a little unsure. I like my Easter eggs, but like a lot of current productions, not just in like say Marvel, but like general of like adaptations and Easter eggs are so heavy, like from Star Wars to Marvel. It's like they're constantly trying to throw things in there. And I like it when it's done with taste, but I don't like the overemphasis on just like hooking people in, like by showing them that thing they remember from the book or from the old version, type of stuff. But I could spend so long on Spider-Man 2 alone because that is probably my favorite one out of all the Spider-Man films. But then going into Spider-Man 3, things just went wrong. That being said, as a kid, I really enjoyed the movie. As a child, it was still an entertaining movie. But, you know more about that movie than the actual production and the surrounding circumstances. Like, how does Sam Raimi go from two really great movies to what fell apart?
Yeah, it really came down to, I think it's pretty well like known that Sam Raimi never wanted to do Venom, or at least not in that movie. And he like had his own thing they wanted to do. I think he wanted to do Vulture as the villain or something like that. Or he really wanted to focus on Sandman. I can't remember exactly, but one of the producers was like dead set on having Venom at all costs. So he kind of, I think Sam Raimi was kind of just like unenthused by it.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely I don't really want to fault Sam Raimi too much because it is a lot of studio meddling that brought that movie down. But that movie doesn't work on like just a basic storytelling level. Like nothing makes sense from scene to scene. You get this stupid amnesia plot with Harry. You get like all these just really lazy plot points. You bring back Uncle Ben after you like beautifully close out his story in 2, or Peter Parker's story with him in 2. And it was just a complete mess.
And what's so sad is that when you say it was really just a mess on a scene-to-scene basis, on a storytelling basis, but there was actually still a lot of potential within the movie in that like a lot of the action sequences were still very cool. A lot of the actual directing, like on a shot-by-shot basis, not involving particularly the story, was still very good.
Sandman, the scene where Sandman like becomes Sandman is still incredible.
Yeah, I enjoyed Sandman, what they tried to do with him, at least like the little bits, all the action sequences looked really good. I even was not particularly, as someone who's not like a massive comic book fan of, the Green Goblin or the Hobgoblin, I kind of liked with where they were trying to go with Harry. And I liked Franco's portrayal of Harry. Not relating to the comics, I'm not going to talk about whether or not it was too true or not, but like just as an actor portraying a character, I liked a lot of the ideas. I liked the relationship with MJ. It was really just the way it all came together. It was like a bunch of decent ideas that could be great, with a lot of potential with the actors and the set pieces and even the story ideas. It was just that none of it came together.
Yeah.
So, but so to wrap up the review on the first trilogy, obviously 2 is far and away the best, and I really love 1. We can just pretend like 3 didn't happen though. So, but now moving forward in time, Andrew Garfield and his rendition of Spider-Man, you can criticize it all day, but in the end, Andrew Garfield himself, it just feels like got the short end of the stick.
Yeah,
because first of all, they rebooted that series way too early. No one was ready or asking for a new Spider-Man at that time.
Yeah, well, and the whole reason that movie was made was just to keep the rights to Spider-Man because they were about to be up, and Sam Raimi wasn't going to be quick enough with Spider-Man 4. So they hired a much cheaper director and a lot, newer cast, and made it very quickly. And I think under the circumstances and what they had to do, especially rebooting a movie so quickly, what they had to not do, I think it actually came out pretty good considering. Because if you think about retelling the origin story so soon after the first one, there were certain plot points that they almost couldn't do. Couldn't touch.
Like I said,
they had to like retell
things
it.
Things were stacked against this series.
Yeah, and for how stacked against it the odds were, it actually isn't a bad movie. The areas of it are like clearly cut up. It's clear that the final edit was not what Mark Webb intended to be, because there are plot points in the movie that just are completely forgotten about. Characters just disappear midway through the movie.
Which one are you talking about?
The first one.
The first one.
Yeah. There's a character in the movie. I can't remember his name, but it's who the lizard's going after in the bridge scene. Mm-hmm. After the bridge scene, he's never seen again.
Oh yeah, no, I remember that.
But if you watch he's in the deleted scenes. There's a scene where he dies in the deleted scenes. I'm like, how do you delete that scene?
Yeah, it's like, and it's a smaller topic because there's only 2 of these movies got made. And less than going after both movies and trying to break down each movie individually, I think you can apply a lot of the same problems from each movie to both movies. You know, like a lot of what plagued the first one was only worse in the second one.
Yeah.
And, I originally really did not like the first Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movie. And I'm a fan of Garfield himself as an actor. And I even, looking back at it now, I don't mind his interpretation of Spider-Man. But I was really not a fan of the movie. I just did not enjoy that movie. Did not work for me on any level. The first one did. And then moving into the second one, the second one kind of gets railed at more, and it had even more production problems and more studio struggles, and it really started to fall apart. But I think the second one was actually where it started to gain some momentum if they had been able to execute. Like, the second one actually had all the ideas. I thought it actually had a lot more of an interesting direction than the first one did. So it was really sad that it fizzled in the way that it did, because I really liked where they wanted to go with like Harry and the Green Goblin. And if you look at the second one, it has a lot of good moments too. And I mean,
that's the thing about both those movies, is that what Mark Webb to me really brought to the table, and I really wish that he would have been able to explore more, was just the human moments and the like human connection with Peter Parker and all the characters surrounding him. Mm-hmm. Like, there's in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, like sandwiched in between these like just terrible moments and these like really clunky storytelling moments, you've got this scene between Andrew Garfield and Sally Field that is just like Oscar worthy moments of acting, and it's incredible. And you're just like, how is this stuck in the middle of this complete mess of a movie? And
this point that I'm about to make actually kind of relates to that in a way, in that this is something that was in the Toby Maguire's version of Spider-Man as well. But like, when you talk about set pieces with Spider-Man, and obviously Marvel's going to be known, like if you move forward to Tom Holland, they're going to be known for their set pieces and their action and all their high budget stuff. But even still, not much of what Tom Holland has done has impressed me visually in the way that both Toby Maguire's and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man did. Like, looking at the climax scenes of Garfield's second Spider-Man movie, like the clock tower scene where he's chasing after not MJ, Gwen. It's not like such a normie. Gwen, yeah, I knew that. But when he's like diving after her, and then like when she snaps and dies, and the scene following it, like from the action set piece, the creativity, the way it was shot and performed, and then the actual acting on his part, the death scene was gorgeous. And it was so sad. And honestly, that scene at that point in time, like, did so much for me in regards to almost making me forget the problems that the movie had before. It's like, I wasn't worried about Electro anymore. Like, I thought that when Harry started to take over and that those parts started to come into play, like it got a good amount of momentum. Yeah,
there's parts of both those movies that are so good that they make you forget about how much of a mess really just the superhero side of the movie is. Because I feel like that's really where those movies fell apart, was actually when you got into the superhero angle of it. Mm-hmm. Like, I think a lot of the first Amazing Spider-Man movie works up until you get the villain and the like his plot and that side of the story. A lot of the character stuff was really good in those movies. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you were mentioning about the set pieces is that those two movies, more than Tom Holland Spider-Man and more than Toby Macguire Spider-Man, captured like the weight and physicality of Spider-Man. When he was swinging, it really felt like he was swinging. And even in Sam Raimi's movies, like it looked fine, but it kind of looked like he was floating when he was swinging. And in Tom Holland Spider-Man, I don't get how like they thought that his swinging looked okay in that movie. I mean, he doesn't do a whole lot of swinging, but the end of Far From Home, when he's swinging, it just looks so cartoony.
I've just always thought they just do whatever they wanted with him, like in the physics, like in those movies.
But Garfield Spider-Man, like the effects on him swinging were just incredible. And in the first movie, they kind of ditched it in the second movie, but in the first movie, there were actually moments where they filmed it practically, like it was actually a guy swinging, and they look really good.
Yeah, it's just it seems like Garfield's rendition of Spider-Man really just got the short end of the stick. There were so many good ideas to it, both from the director as well as what Garfield brought to the table. It just felt like it was so muddled by so many different circumstances. Another thing that I want to briefly touch on is the difference in portrayal of Spider-Man, because there was a lot of talk at the time, and this was something that initially turned me off, was I was like, this guy is way too cool to be Spider-Man. They were like this skateboard gamer type of Spider-Man, which really was jarring, going from Toby Maguire's, kind of nerdy photographer type of thing. Like it was always unbelievable. And this is something that the movie didn't do well, was I liked his actual portrayal of it was fine, but the movie itself didn't portray him very well. In that they were like, "Oh yeah, he's a dork. He doesn't have friends."
Yeah.
And then it's just like, really? He this guy doesn't have friends, and then he's over here being like so like smooth and cute with like Gwen Stacy, like the hottest girl around, and he's just getting this girl, and like it's just so, it was so hard to believe that he was like this loser.
There's two things that I want to give the first Amazing Spider-Man movie credit for, because they're the two moments that I loved in that movie. Was that they didn't play the whole he's got to keep his identity secret from his girlfriend.
Yeah, that
was genuinely subversive and interesting. And also one thing that they changed from the original movies and a lot of the comic book interpretations of it is that he became Spider-Man to get revenge on the guy that killed Uncle Ben. And it's only in the scene where he saves all the people on the bridge where he realizes like basically his error, and that he can use it to help people. And that scene's really great. And it's like the first time you hear like the actual Spider-Man theme of the movie, and it's a really great scene. So yeah, those are two moments that I feel like don't get credit in those movies because there's so much else.
That alone wraps up the sentiment around those movies that I feel like you and I both kind of agree on, is that like there were sparks and little hints of genius in that iteration of Spider-Man. And it's honestly, it's really just sad to me. Like, you know, you could say that it's sad what happened to Sam Raimi's third Spider-Man and where it was going, but like I think it's the most tragic aspect of the Spider-Man universe. It was what happened to those movies, because I think they actually had something that they could have built on, and it could have been truly great, and something that could have made it so that we never saw Tom Holland Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that I don't enjoy Tom Holland Spider-Man, because moving into the latest, you know, the current era of the Marvel Spider-Man, there's a lot to unpack. And it's going to be hard to unpack all of it because it's you're opening the gates for so much more. And there's things I like about that, with, you know, Spider-Man now being a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and so forth. And there's also things that kind of make it hard or complicate things. And it's really, I think, trade-off. It's a trade-off. And I know you're not a huge fan of Tom Holland's Spider-Man films. That being said, I understand some of the criticisms for them, and I have a lot of criticisms for them. That being said, I cut them some slack because it's such a different thing that they have to handle. You know, it's things that the original movies never had to deal with. So now that we've got the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you know, first of all, you have the existence and the cameo effects of different players within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like obviously Tony Stark being, you know, like a major player in both of those movies. And things like that are, you know, it complicates things, and it's hard because I think a lot of people jump on the love train of the new movies because it's just, it's all iterated, you know, like everything is or incorporated into these movies. Now it's like this big universe, and he's got other superhero friends and Tony Stark and the Avengers and things like that. And I do kind of like that, but I do think it takes a little bit away from it. And it also, I think it covers over some of the weaker spots. It's like the way that, and this Marvel does this with a lot of their movies, is that the way that the solo movies, their weaknesses get covered by the team up abilities and the nods and the Easter eggs and the hints and the ways that they fit into the larger movies, and it covers up a lot of those weaknesses for me. So we'll just start with Tom Holland's portrayal of Spider-Man. We may have some contention on this. I do not have a problem with Tom Holland's portrayal of Spider-Man. I think he is a great actor, and I really like what he brings to the table as Spider-Man. And I say that barring the fact that I think he had to do something different from the last two as well. Like, I think he had to make his own. And so I give him the credit for making his own Spider-Man. Yeah. He plays a really fun, young kid Spider-Man.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because he even said this. It's clear that like most of his inspiration in portraying Spider-Man actually came from Andrew Garfield. Like a lot of the mannerisms and a lot of the way that he talks. Like, and he said, he was like, I'm gonna rip some of the things that he did. And I think he does it really well. My issue with the portrayal of Spider-Man isn't really Tom Holland's fault. My issue with it is that it's, to me, I never feel like there's high stakes with him. I feel like he's meant to be cute, and his movies are meant to be fluffy and sort of fun, especially Homecoming. Nothing seems to matter in that movie. And the main compelling aspect of Spider-Man is that, like, his personal problems are always getting more in the way of his Spider-Man problems are always getting in the way of his personal life. And in Homecoming, that's kind of the case, but he's bailed out on every occasion. So whereas in Spider-Man 2, what they did so well was that his Spider-Man problems really caused problems in his personal life. And it was so compelling because you just wanted this guy to be able to live his normal life the way they wanted to. And in Homecoming, it's like they sort of try to act like that's the case, but there's never any consequences for anything that he does.
Yeah, I remember talking.
And it feels so, I don't know, it feels so against Spider-Man to me. And on top of that, the fact that they won't even go near Uncle Ben is a massive problem because he is so integral to Spider-Man as a character. And the fact that they act like he doesn't even exist and almost tried to shoehorn Iron Man in as the Uncle Ben figure, it just feels completely wrong to me.
And I can agree with that, with it feeling wrong. That being said, I would not fault them entirely for that because of the fact that on their end, they may be thinking, we've seen this Uncle Ben thing happen like twice now. We've got to give people something new. We got to try and they've really worked hard to try and separate this Spider-Man from the old ones. So while I agree with you that I wish there was the Uncle Ben aspect, I don't like hate them for
it's more that they did away with the Uncle Ben aspect and they didn't find something with enough dramatic weight to replace it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that was really my problem with the first movie. I really loved Tom Holland's performance in the first movie. And that being said, I've always enjoyed Tom Holland's performances in the team up movies more than I do his, I think he can carry a movie as an actor, in his movies outside of Spider-Man. But that being said, with Spider-Man, I don't know that he carries he has the star power theoretically, but in Captain America Civil War and all the Avengers movies that he's a part of, he steals the scene in every time he gets on screen, he's so lovable, so fun and cute. His dialogue is always so clever. And I think that where he excels as Spider-Man is the clever dialogue and like the kind of just like the staples of the character. Whereas when he has to carry a whole movie and be an actual character, I feel like they've struggled to build a real character out of Spider-Man.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like they want him to be cute and
they want him that one note. And it's the one note is really great when he's swinging in Civil War and making jokes and fighting everyone, or when everything in Endgame and Infinity War is going on. It's really fun. He's stealing the scene all the time. But in his own movie, I feel like the writing is not to the level that those team up movies is in the dialogue, and it makes it struggle because he doesn't have a lot left under him. And they have come to rely on their tone so much that it doesn't feel like there's really a lot of character underneath it. Yeah. Like it's almost like I don't even fault like Tom Holland. It feels like he doesn't have a lot to work with. Like if you go back and you compare, which I think this is the best comparison of all of them, is like something like Spider-Man Homecoming and Spider-Man 2 with Toby Macguire, was that what really made Spider-Man 2 work was how deeply personal the conflict was and how they really gave it the time to breathe and they gave the character time to learn. He had consequences and high stakes at every turn. And that was complemented by a great bad guy and great set pieces, great writing, and great pacing. You can see where they've tried to hit all of those notes in Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, but they don't hit as hard. They don't. It's like they've got too much else. It's almost like, and this is the weight of being in a cinematic universe, is that they've got too much else they've got to do too. That's the other thing. It comes to a point where the focus that the original Spider-Man Toby Macguire trilogy had, or the ability to focus so deeply on the one character and his arcs. Whereas now when you're in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you're beholden to so much else that I think that it distills the life out of a lot of its characters, not just Spider-Man. The life is all there in the team ups, but when a lot of the characters have to stand on their own, it feels like that they're not even allowed to do what they need to do to really create super compelling stories within the characters. Yeah. They're great at creating characters and personas, but they struggle to really give the characters the life in their own contained stories that I think they need to really be able to have a truly great movie. Because I've really enjoyed and loved a lot of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, and especially the team-ups. But if you look back and try to find, like, in all of the solo movies, if you try and find, like, how many of them were truly just great movies? Maybe 2 or 3. They've got like 10 years of movies, but like 2 or 3 of them were like just stood on their own as great movies where the characters really got fulfilling arcs and they really executed everything. And I think that's because they end up beholden to so many other aspects of the universe in their films that it becomes hard to pull it all together, because at some point you're juggling so many things, you're going to drop some.
Yeah.
And I think that in all art, it's common advice and something to always remember is to not bite off more than you can chew. Yeah. And focusing on, and that's why the Toby Macguire Spider-Man's, the first 2 specifically, and was the downfall of the third. But the first 2 specifically did those things that we're talking about so well. And a lot of superhero movies and other movies, franchise movies across the board, would benefit so much from taking that hint.
Yeah. Well, the main issue with Tom Holland's Spider-Man is that I don't feel like he's developed past the first scene that he was in Civil War. I thought the first scene that he was in Civil War with Robert Downey Jr. was great. Like, I was so excited for his interpretation because I felt like they really, in that like 5-minute scene, just nailed all the aspects of Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. And I feel like ever since then, he's been so flat and so one note. And it's not Tom Holland's fault at all. He plays him well, but it feels like all they want is for him to be cute and people to smile when he comes on screen. And that works in the team-up movies, like you were talking about. Like, it works fine in the team-up movies. And he steals the show. But in his own movies, it feels so empty. It feels like they want it to be light and fluffy. And that's fine, but it just doesn't work for more than 2 hours. And it doesn't work when you don't feel the weight of anything going on. Like, I never felt like he was in any real danger in Spider-Man Homecoming.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it feels so against like the core of Spider-Man's character. Like, as much as the Amazing Spider-Man movies got wrong, they got it right that he had a sacrifice for everything. Like, he lost everything in those movies. Mm-hmm. And he lost everything in the original 3 Spider-Man movies. And I feel like in Spider-Man Homecoming and Spider-Man Far From Home, it's just like, he's Spider-Man. Look, isn't he cute and funny? And
yeah. And I think like, I will say, to push back a little bit, I think Spider-Man Homecoming struggled the most. And that movie really didn't have much original to it to begin with. And that it had these weird shoes to fill, and it didn't do either. It didn't fill the shoes, but it also didn't really make new shoes.
Yeah.
It was really strange. But that being said, I went into the second movie, Far From Home, with really low expectations. And maybe that was what made me like it so much, but I thought that Far From Home did much better. I thought it was a much better film across the board. I don't know that it fixed all the problems that we already had, but I did really enjoy that movie. And I thought that they handled him having an arc. I don't know if it was the arc that I wanted, but I thought that they did a lot better with developing the character.
I think where that movie worked a lot better for me was Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. Mm-hmm. I think it worked well for Spider-Man's character. Like, I thought it was a good villain to go up against. I didn't think the movie was working up until Gyllenhaal made the switch to like reveal that he was the villain. Essentially, like, I wasn't really into it up until that point. Up until that point, it felt like it had every one of the problems from Homecoming, and I was like, okay, this is just more of the same. After that flip, I think it was around like the hour point. The second hour was much better, and I was like, okay, I actually could see. I really
enjoyed the climax of that movie, and I liked the way they handled him with Tony Stark and the shoes that he had to fill, and his struggle. I thought him as a character, they did a better job of giving him a struggle.
Right.
And making him feel like there was some real weight and stakes to what was going on. But they still maintained that, fun high school vibe while kind of upping the stakes and doing that. And I thought the movie across the board was better executed.
Right.
So that being said, what's next for Spider-Man within the MCU? I think it'll be interesting to see where they go from here, because Spider-Man, honestly, for the MCU to continue working at the level that it did all the way up until Endgame, Spider-Man has to step into a lot bigger shoes, in my opinion. I don't feel like, and this may be a controversial take, but I don't feel like I don't feel like Marvel has the firepower right now in its characters without Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. Just in that all of its new characters and all the replacement characters that it's been adding so far, we'll see what they have to offer. None of them have been hitting the way that Thor and Iron Man really did. You know, like if you don't have your Thor, Iron Man, Hulk, etc., like that was a superstar cast of characters that were so well realized. And a lot of the new characters, like looking at like Falcon, Winter Soldier, you know, all the new peripheral characters that they've added in, Captain Marvel, you know, nobody is stoked on those characters. But Spider-Man is the one character that has the legacy to back him up that can really lead this through. You know, even like Doctor Strange, you know, there's been talk of Doctor Strange being like, you know, a bigger character in the coming movies. And I'm like, and I love, you know, Benedict Cumberbatch, but I don't know that I feel like he phones in his Doctor Strange, and I don't know that character can really carry the weight of someone like Tony Stark. And it's going to be so hard because Robert Downey Jr., like, I don't know that anyone can carry that weight ever again. But that being said, I think the person with the most potential, the character idea with the most potential to really steal the show is Spider-Man. And right now, he's not doing that. And he's shown the potential to. I think he has the possibility to. But he's with the third movie that they do, and wherever they go from there involving Spider-Man, I need to see him step it up.
Yeah, and I think if they go the sort of Spider-Verse route, which I haven't heard any more news on that, but I don't know if that's actually going to be what they do. But I think if they go that route, then that'll be really interesting.
Yeah.
I think the multiverse route is probably their best option, especially after losing Chadwick Boseman.
Yeah,
like that was another character that could have stepped really into a bigger role. Yeah. And yeah, I hate that. But I think the multiverse route is the way that they should go. That being said, they're basically going to be copying what Spider-Verse or Into the Spider-Verse did right.
Yeah, that's the hard thing about. I want them to do multiverse so bad with Spider-Man 3 and the coming movies. You know, I want them to open up that can of worms, because that's really the only thing that can really get me excited personally for a new Marvel arc. But that being said, you know, and Into the Spider-Verse did that so well that it feels a little bit awkward to say that they should go there now.
Honestly, what I want to see for Spider-Man is more Spider-Verse movies. More Into the Spider-Verse movies.
Yeah,
like
and that was the
ones.
next thing that I want to talk about. We didn't really include Into the Spider-Verse in this, you know, review. And that is because it is an animated film. But I do want to touch on it just briefly and say that Into the Spider-Verse, if we're actually looking at it, I would say that, you know, before getting into the film, if we're ranking Spider-Man movies, I think we probably both agree that out of all the Spider-Man franchise films, Spider-Man 2 was the best one. Mm-hmm. It's really such a great film, an iconic film. That being said, I think that Into the Spider-Verse is on that same level. You know, it's hard to say because it doesn't have the time tested. You know, we haven't seen how it ages, but I think it will age very well. And I really think that Into the Spider-Verse is levels above everything else that's been done in Spider-Man outside of Spider-Man 2. I would even say Into the Spider-Verse is better than Spider-Man 1. You know, I would put those two films as like the best ones. But since we are just keeping this to live action, I'll just say for anyone, you know, watching this, it's like, but Into the Spider-Verse is really the best. It's way better. We agree. we agree. But that being said, to include Into the Spider-Verse in this assessment would add. we could talk about that film for quite a while because it really is brilliant. I love so much of what it does. But also so much of what it does is so new and fresh. And that's what I love about it. But it also doesn't really relate that much to the Spider-Man arc that we've been dealing with these other three portrayals. And that, you know, the classic Spider-Man, bit by a spider, Uncle Ben, you know, typical villains arc. They did so much new and they did so much well that you could talk about it for a long time.
Right.
but I would put that one up there. I don't know how you would fit it into talking about all the films though as a whole. So yeah, I definitely think out of the live action Spider-Mans, Spider-Man 2 with Toby Macguire is by far the best one. What would you say would be the best series as a whole? You know, the problem is they all have problems, you know?
They all suck in some ways.
They all have something that really dropped the ball.
I guess just because of how good Spider-Man 2 is, I'd have to go with the first series is the best one. Because I don't really... I
think the first two are strong on their own.
I don't care for Homecoming or Far From Home at all. Like,
Yeah.
even...
Far From
Even
Home,
when you
I think is a good movie.
I'd say they're better. Yeah, I like Far From Home better, but
It's
I
not
still
enough
don't
to carry like a series itself as being like, this is the best series.
Right. But even with all the issues of the Amazing Spider-Man movies, I like the parts that I like about those movies more than I like the Tom Holland movies.
There's almost too much lukewarm in Tom Holland's movies.
Yeah, it's like at
even
best,
the good
they're
parts,
they're fun.
It's just like, oh, that
there's
was pretty
nothing
good.
that impressive. In the Amazing Spider-Man movies, I feel like there's a lot of lows and there's a lot of highs. And some of the stuff that those movies did right did better than the original trilogy and the new stuff. So yeah, the originals I'd say are the best series as a whole. But if I had to rank them like movie by movie, I'd say Spider-Man 2 is the best. Then I'd say probably Spider-Man 1 and the first Amazing Spider-Man would go like side by side for me. And then kind of the rest of them just...
It's really hard to
I'd say Spider-Man 3 and Amazing Spider-Man 2 are the worst two.
Yeah.
But Far From Home and... Far From Home's better than Homecoming, but they kind of go in the same...
Yeah, it's like, I don't want to sound like, you know, we're downing the new Spider-Man, because like there's so much that I like about it, but the problem is just that the highs aren't high enough.
Yeah.
It's that they do have highs. They're strong movies in their own right, but they don't hit the highs that, like, you know, even if you look back at the Amazing Spider-Man, you can look back at it and go, well, that was the worst one, you know, because that was just riddled with problems across both two movies. But that being said, the highs of those movies were more memorable than the highs of Homecoming and Far From Home.
Like, even if I think back to like the experience of watching them for the first time, like I was like 4 years old when Spider-Man 2 came out. And I remember seeing that movie in theaters. Like, it was probably one of the first movies I remember seeing in theaters. And I remember watching him swing at the end of that movie, just like, this is incredible. And I remember seeing the first Amazing Spider-Man movie, and the swinging scene at the end is just incredible. And I was just like, oh, this is amazing. I don't have any like memory like that of seeing the new movies. Like, the new movies, at best, they're fine and they're kind of forgettable.
That's something where it's the odds are pitted against the new movies too, because they're the last ones to come too.
Yeah.
But that being said, if you look at something like, I mean, I know it's a completely different medium. You look at Into the Spider-Verse, they didn't have a problem with it. But the problem is that what the Tom Holland Spider-Man should learn from Into the Spider-Verse is that they took risks. They took risks and they did something new. They really stepped out. The problem is that the Tom Holland Spider-Man is just too stagnant. But that being said, I feel like they do have the possibility to remedy that. It just depends on where the new Marvel vision goes with the third movie and what comes after.
It just kind of feels like it has that it gets the bland side of the MCU for me. Like, even down to the music, like the Spider-Man theme just isn't. Yeah. It's very like generic MCU theme, and I don't know. Like, I feel like it kind of the final swinging scene in Far From Home kind of captures my feeling. I just go, it doesn't quite look right. It doesn't quite feel right. It just kind of feels bland. Yeah. And that kind of goes back also to the times. You know, a lot of these new movies we've talked about multiple times. We don't have time to get into it on this podcast, but you know, the more TV like feel of Marvel movies and the way that they don't really, aside from like Endgame and the big films, the solo films have a very TV show-esque feel to them. Even when they're big budget, even if they're well produced and they look great, they don't really have quite the cinematic experience quality. The other thing that I hate about Tom Holland Spider-Man is the Spider-Man suit. The Spider-Man suit, the actual design of it looks good, but it's like partly CGI, and it looks CGI. Mm-hmm. It looks fake. And if you come from Amazing Spider-Man 2, which has the best movie suit, especially when Garfield's actually in the suit and it's not CGI. Like, the suit looks incredible. Mm-hmm. And they got like the big eyes and it just looks awesome. Yeah. And then you go to Tom Holland Spider-Man and it has this like glossy CGI look to it. Yeah. And that's where you get into some of the nerdier aspects of like, we could go for actually a good deal longer. But we're going to wrap it up in just a second. So my final
question is, what do you think the best portrayal of Spider-Man by an actor actually is across them? And I don't mean what the story that they were given. Like, who do you think has the most potential or the most was the best Spider-Man?
I think it was Garfield.
Garfield?
For sure. I think the highs of his performances in both movies, like certain moments, especially like Gwen's death, or even like certain scenes in the first Amazing Spider-Man, are so resonant. And he captured, even though he was so much older than the character that he was playing, he really captured that feeling and that sort of confusion of being that age so well.
Yeah, and I would agree with you there. But to explain it a little more, I think that Toby Macguire had the most to work with as a story in the films that he had. But I think that Andrew Garfield, even though his films went down the drain so quickly, and you wouldn't even put one of the films, it sounds almost weird to say that he had the best portrayal, but I think as an actor, he's such a seasoned actor in that he and he's like an award, like he's like a high ticket actor now, and he kind of was at the time, but he was still kind of up and coming. I think that if given the right material and allowed to grow, that he really did have a portrayal of Spider-Man that, and I'm not talking about, just like how he looked or the suit they gave him, or, like I'm just talking about the actor's ability. And that I really think that, that his portrayal had the most potential. And that being said, I think that Tom Holland is quite possibly headed in that direction. He's been branching out and doing a lot of other kinds of movies. He's clearly trying to not get relegated to just being superhero Spider-Man. And all the new stuff that he's been doing, I have been really impressed by outside of Spider-Man. So I don't think it's that, it's not a knock on Holland to say that Garfield outdid him in his performance. I think that Holland has the ability to reach those heights. I just think he's a little younger. He's not quite as far along as Garfield was at the time.
Yeah.
And, there's room. That's the thing, the knocks that we leave on the MCU version of Spider-Man can be remedied because they're only 2 movies in, and they have the ability to go a lot further than the originals did. We only got like vaguely 3 movies of Toby Macguire. We got like a movie and a half of Garfield. And at this point, we're definitely getting a third Spider-Man and possibly more, and more appearances throughout different movies. So there's so much that they can do with him that 5 or even 10 years from now, it might be possible to say that Tom Holland really was like the ultimate Spider-Man. But until then, those are our thoughts. So thank you guys for watching this episode of the Cortright Cast. We'll be back next week with some new topics. And if you guys enjoy the more focused topics that we've been doing both this week and last week, as opposed to covering more Hollywood news, which we will continue to do as the spicy subjects come about. But yeah, if you enjoy this type of discussion, leave us a comment and hit the like button, because that really lets us know what you guys want to see in the future. But otherwise, subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next video.